Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. I was sent something the other day that I thought was pretty interesting. It was supposedly written by Ron Howard. He's the actor from Happy Days show, and that really has since become a pretty popular, pretty good film director, in my opinion. I have said on this show and others on many occasions that I believe that liberalism is not rooted in logic or common sense, but in emotionalism. Liberals share their ideology mostly out of wanting to feel better about themselves, and conservatives share their ideology mostly out of reality and making logical sense. Liberalism goes contrary to human nature, thinking that all people are naturally good and just need guidance by liberals and the government to do the right thing. The right thing is always defined by them, by the way, but that's another episode of the podcast. Conservatives, they believe that the less the government gets involved in people's lives, the better. Personal freedom and Judeo-Christian underpinnings promote prosperity and justice for everyone. This aligns with human nature, since all people are naturally sinful and thus selfish. People will do the right thing if it benefits them and have the freedom to choose how to spend their money and time. Supply and demand, with few restraints, will produce what a society needs, and law and order will provide justice for the innocent. So that gets us back to what Ron Howard supposedly wrote, summing up why he is a liberal. I want to go through his 16 points today and give you a little commentary on each one. He says, I'm a liberal, but that doesn't mean what a lot of you apparently think it does. Let's break it down, shall we? Because, quite frankly, I'm getting a little tired of being told what I believe and what I stand for. Spoiler alert, not every liberal is the same, though a majority of liberals I know think along roughly these same lines. And let me stop here. I will say, I agree not everyone thinks the same, whether that be liberals or conservatives or whatever, okay? We all kind of get put into these boxes because it best illustrates what our general ideology is. But let's continue. Number one, he says, I believe a country should take care of its weakest members. A country cannot call itself civilized when its children, disabled, sick, and elderly, are neglected. Period. Okay. All right. I can agree that we should be able to take care of those that need help. That's that we can agree on. But he is being very vague here. I mean, he says a country should take care of them. What does that mean? I mean, he would say that the government using taxpayer dollars should do it, I'm sure. And he is also insinuating that we don't currently help them. This is just not the case. I mean, look at what we spend. 3/5 of the current federal budget goes to social services. 3/5. That's over half of our tax dollars at the federal level go towards social services. And I'm not even talking about, your city or your state or your, county budgets. But I would say that that our country is more than taking care of those in need. If you look at it from a dollar perspective, and how those dollars are spent by government, well, that's another story, right? Again, probably another podcast. All right, number two, I believe healthcare is a right, not a privilege. Somehow that's interpreted as, I believe Obamacare is the end all and be all. this is not the case, he says. I'm fully aware that the ACA has problems, that a national healthcare system would require everyone to chip in, and that it's impossible to create one that is devoid of flaws. But I have yet to hear an argument against it that makes let people die because they can't afford healthcare a better alternative. I believe healthcare should be far cheaper than it is, and that everyone should have access to it. And no, I'm not opposed to paying higher taxes in the name of making that happen. Oof, okay. There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, healthcare is definitely not a right. A right, of course, is something given to every person by God. But okay, it's definitely not a right. It never has been a right as long as there has been a planet Earth. And it isn't now, okay? In our country, we come the closest, I would say, to it, since anyone can go to the hospital, whether they can pay for it or not, and get help. We even let those that have broken the law by being here illegally get treatment and not pay for it in many cases. God never said that everyone has a right to health care. Where would that actually come from anyway? Where would the money come from for that? Other people's pockets? Yeah, that's where. And with government-run healthcare, it only gets worse. Obamacare showed that to everyone. I really like this part, though, the let people die because they can't afford healthcare comment. Because that is what is happening in Canada right now. The government can't afford healthcare for all. And so they keep cutting back on what can be treated and cutting more and more back. And people are dying of the long wait lines for everything else. So even if it does get covered, people are dying because they have to wait years in some cases. And since the government, they can't afford health care for all, they're pressuring many to actually kill themselves. That's not health care. So number 3, I believe education should be affordable. It doesn't necessarily have to be free, he says, though it works in other countries, so I'm mystified as to why it can't work in the U.S. But at the end of the day, there is no excuse for students graduating college saddled with 5 or 6 figure debt. Okay, this is where actually we partly agree on this. I too believe that a college degree is way, way too expensive, especially when you walk away with a degree in lesbian theory on underwater basket weaving. But to have free education all the way through college is where we part ways. I believe that if we are going to call it education, we need to actually educate students. And that's not happening right now, even at the K through 12 level, let alone the college and university level. But let's move on. Number 4, I don't believe your money, he says, should be taken from you and given to people who don't want to work. I have literally never encountered anyone who believes this, he says, ever. Whoa. Small group of friends, Ron? Anyway, I just have a massive moral problem, he says, with a society where a handful of people can possess the majority of the wealth, while there are people literally starving to death, freezing to death, or dying because they can't afford to go to the doctor. Fair wages, lower housing costs, universal health care, affordable education, and the wealthy actually paying their share should go a long way toward alleviating this. Somehow believing that makes me a communist. Well, you may not know of anyone personally, Ron, but 33%, that's a third of all SNAP recipients are non-elderly, non-disabled adults with age in between the ages of 18 and 49. In other words, able to work. No one is starving, and no one's freezing or dying in this country without there being, mental health or abuse issues involved. And I'm getting pretty tired of the phrase fair wage. There is not a liberal out there that can define the term. At least that's what I found anyway. It is just a union talking point that he's pulling out here. So am I to believe that as an employer that I need to make sure that the 16-year-old that I employ has to be able to pay for rent and an apartment and his own car? Minimum wage laws have only hurt those that liberals say they want to help. And that is a data-driven fact. But he goes on and he says, I don't throw around, I'm willing to pay higher taxes lightly. If I'm struggling, or it says, if I'm suggesting something that involves paying more, well, it's because I'm fine with paying my share as long as it's actually going to something besides lining corporate pockets or bombing other countries while Americans die without health care. I didn't look up what he's worth, but I can pretty much tell you he is definitely in the top 10%. But anyway, ignoring the Americans die without healthcare thing, let's talk about raising taxes. Just in the federal tax, the top 1% of federal income tax filers paid over 38% of the entire tax. Almost 40% of all the money that's paid into the federal government from taxpayers comes from the top 1%. 5% paid 61%, the top 5, and the top 10 paid over 70% of the total federal taxes. If you made the tax rate, let's say 100%, okay, he's talking about their fair share, but let's just say that for a year we're just going to tax the top 1%, 100% of their money they earn. So we're going to take it all, right? They can afford it, right? Well, if you did that, you would still only be able to fund the government for about 3.5 months. That's it. That's all. Number 6, I believe companies should be required to pay their employees a decent, livable wage. Somehow this is always interpreted as me wanting burger flippers to be able to afford a penthouse apartment and a Mercedes. What it actually means is that no one should have to work 3 full-time jobs just to keep their head above water. Restaurant servers should not have to rely on tips. Multi-billion-dollar companies should not have employees on food stamps. Workers shouldn't have to work themselves into the ground just to barely make ends meet. And minimum wage should be enough for someone to work 40 hours and live. Ron, I know a better way. Yeah, it's called the success sequence. Have you heard of it? If you do 3 things in order, now again, these things have to be in order, but if you do these 3 things in order, 97% of the time you will not be in poverty. You ready? Number 1, finish at least high school. Number 1. Number 2, work a full-time job. And number 3, marry before having children. That's it. That's it. If you do those 3 things in that order, finish at least high school, work a full-time job, and marry before having children, then you're almost guaranteed to not be in poverty in this country. All right, number 7. I am not anti-Christian, he says. I have no desire to stop Christians from being Christians, to close churches, to ban the Bible, to forbid prayer in school, etc. And by the way, he says, prayer in school is not illegal. Compulsory prayer in school is. and should be illegal. All, he says, I ask is that Christians recognize my right to live according to my beliefs. When I get pissed off that a politician is trying to legislate scripture into law, I'm not offended by Christianity. I'm offended that you're trying to force me to live your religious rules. You know how you get really upset at the thought of Muslims imposing Sharia law on you. Well, that's how I feel about Christians trying to impose biblical law on me. Be a Christian, do your thing, just don't force it on me or mine. Okay, that's what he has to say there. And I would say government is about forcing people to act a certain way. I mean, that's what government is pretty much about. What form of government we have is based on something religious. I mean, let me give you an example, okay? If government makes a law saying that you should not kill someone else, it is basing that law on murder being a bad or immoral thing. It is basing it on a biblical worldview. If I am Muslim, I would have exemptions for murder, like the fact that the Quran says to kill all non-Muslims. So my entire set of laws has to be based on some religious or moral code. It just has to be. Christianity has been ours. But if you just do what you want, like he's suggesting, then you have chaos. Oh, and by the way, liberal governments did shut down churches during COVID for no reason. People are being convicted of having Christian beliefs in Western countries. Like we have to, cover many, like we've covered it many times here on the podcast. But he says it's not happening, or he doesn't want it to happen. Well, but most of your liberal friends do. All right, number 8. I don't believe LGBT people should have more rights than you. I just believe, he says, they should have the same rights as you. All right. I mean, the fact is, though, they not only have the same rights, they have special rights. I've been told before by LGBT individuals not to mess around with a protected class. There are government grants even and privileges only available to the LGBT community. They don't want to just be left alone anymore. That maybe that was a thing for a time. And there are, LGBT people that still holds to some of that. But today they want validation and celebration of who they like to have sex with. All right, number 9, he says, I don't believe illegal immigrants should come to America and have the world at their feet, especially since this isn't what they do, he says. Spoiler, undocumented immigrants are ineligible for all those programs they're supposed to be abusing, he says. And if they're stealing your job, it's because your employer is hiring illegally. I believe, he says, there are far more humane ways to handle undocumented immigration than our current policies, i.e. detaining children, splitting up families, ending DACA, etc. Yeah. This isn't what is happening? Really? More than $617 million. Repeat that. More than $617 million in taxpayer-funded cash welfare flowed to California households headed by illegal immigrant parents last year. That's accounting for the lion's share of such spending nationwide, according to a new federal report. The report, published by the Federal Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families and shared with the California Post, found that more than 85,000 households nationwide received cash assistance through a so-called child-only cases in fiscal year 2024. Nearly 60,000 of those households were actually from California, by the way. The cases involved welfare benefits that are officially issued on behalf of children because their parents are ineligible for assistance due to factors such as, immigration status. All right, number 10. I don't believe the government should regulate everything, but since greed is such a driving force in our country, we need regulations to prevent cut corners, environmental destruction, tainted food and water, unsafe materials in consumable goods or medical equipment, etc. It's not that I want the government's hands in everything. I just don't trust people trying to make money to ensure that their products, practices, etc. are actually safe. Is the government devoid of shadiness? Of course not. But with those regulations in place, consumers have recourse if they're harmed, and companies are liable for medical bills, environmental cleanup, etc. Just kind of seems like common sense when the alternative to government regulation is letting companies bring their bottom line into the equation. All right, so let me get this straight. People can't be trusted, but people in government can. I'm not saying that all government regulation is bad here, by the way. Let me just be perfectly clear. But what I'm saying is that much of what screws up our economy and creates problems, that the problems that the kind that we see today in particular in our country, are because government overregulation is happening and government intervention happens. That is the source of the vast majority of issues. And then government comes in and says, here, let me fix it. It creates the problem and then says, here, let me fix it, and makes it worse. Anyway, number 11. I believe our current administration is fascist. Not because I dislike them or because I can't get over an election, but because I spent too many years reading and learning about the Third Reich to miss the similarities. Not because any administration I dislike must be Nazi, but because things are actually mirroring authoritarian and fascist regimes of the past. Yeah, love the liberal talking points here. Let's look at reality, can we? What ideology pushes for hate speech laws? Criminalizing offensive or biased language? What ideology pushes for campus speech codes, banning specific words or ideas on campus? What ideology pushes for medical mandates? The government forcing a certain vaccine for employment or public access? And how about what ideology pushes for aggressive government rules, like sweeping bans on certain products or energy sources? In California, for instance, just banned 70% of available car tires for purchase. And how about what ideology pushes for forced compliance with social norms, like trying to make religious organizations go against their beliefs by forcing them to pay for employee abortions, for example? So, who's acting like fascists? Number 12. I believe the systemic racism and misogyny in our society is much worse than many people think and desperately needs to be addressed, which means those with privilege, white, straight, male, economic, etc., need to start listening even if you don't like what you're hearing, so we can start dismantling everything that's causing people to be marginalized. Yeah, he's a liberal. he's a liberal, so he had to get in the marginalized word in here. Anyway, our country is not systemically racist, and let's just say that they're right. Okay, let's just say, yeah, okay, you're right. It's systemically racist and things like that. that we have to tear down all the pillars of our country to fight against racism. That we have to be racist to fight racism, which is what they say. Why is it government's job to reprogram its citizens? Why is it their job to reprogram us? Should we be put into concentration camps and try to get our brains retrained? We have the right to be wrong in this country. And you know what that even includes? That even includes those that are racist. Number 13. He says, I am not interested in coming after your blessed guns, nor is anyone serving in government. What I am interested in is the enforcement of present laws and enacting new common sense gun regulations. Got another opinion? Put it on your page, not mine. I don't want to hear anything that doesn't match up with what I think. So Ron, you're not coming after my gun, huh? But you are interested in regulations that keep me from owning it. Got it. It brings up this question, though. What other right do I have to qualify for in order to exercise it? Think about that for a second. What other right do I have to qualify for in order to exercise it? Do I have to submit an extensive form and fee and background check in order to exercise my right to free speech? If healthcare is a right, which is what you're saying, if healthcare is a right, do I need to qualify with the federal government to receive healthcare? Number 14. I believe in so-called political correctness, he says. I prefer to think it's social politeness. If I call you Chuck and you say you prefer to be called Charles, I'll call you Charles. It's the polite thing to do, not because everyone is a delicate snowflake, but because, as Maya Angelou put it, when we know better, we do better. When someone tells you that a term or phrase is more accurate, less hurtful than the one that you're using, you now know better. So why not do better? How does it hurt you to not hurt another person? Okay, let me stop here. Again, why is it any business of the government on what I call someone? If I don't go along with your fantasy of being a horse, then the government should penalize me? Dead naming or misgendering people are already punishable offenses in certain liberal countries. Number 15. We're getting to the end here. I believe in funding sustainable energy, including offering education to people currently working in coal or oil so they can change jobs. There are too many sustainable options available for us to continue with coal and oil. Sorry, billionaires, maybe try investing in something else. So here we go again. He's saying here just untrue things. And I like how he puts this. I mean, so the government can come in and tell me what job I can do and what I can invest in, and that is not fascism? I mean, come on. Besides, so-called green energy is not sustainable. He says they're not sustainable. We cannot keep up with the customers needed currently for electricity, let's say, and especially what we will need in the future with wind and solar power as our alternatives. I also remember, by the way, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, even Joe Biden saying that if you work in the oil or the coal field, you need to learn how to code. Yeah, that did not age well. You need to learn how to code. I wonder what they should learn to do now that coding is basically a dead industry. All right, lastly, number 16. I believe that women should not be treated as a separate class of human. They should be paid the same as men who do the same work, should have the same rights as men, and should be free from abuse. Why on earth shouldn't they be? Now, I'm not sure if he wrote this or his wife, but anyway, this is pretty rich, really, coming from someone who thinks Islam is okay. Many Muslims believe that females have less value than their dog. Here in the United States, on a same job basis, there's no difference in pay between men and women. Women make up 58% of all college and university students. So does that mean that men don't have the same rights as women? And it's interesting that he says women should be free from abuse, totally ignoring that there are men that are abused as well. It happens, trust me. He says, I think that about covers it. Bottom line is that I'm liberal because I think we should take care of each other. He says that doesn't mean you should work 80 hours a week so your lazy neighbor can get all your money. It just means I don't believe there is any scenario in which preventable suffering is an acceptable outcome as long as money is saved. Ron Howard. So let me conclude with this as well. He says that he is a liberal because he believes that if there is any kind of suffering, hurt feelings, antisocial behavior, or any behavior that matters that does not match what he believes, then the government should come in and take your money and force you to align with their moral code. All of this so he can feel better. That is the problem with liberalism right there. They think government and governmental force is the way to a better society. So I leave you with this. Where has this ever been tried and succeeded? Because I can show you a ton of places, both currently and in history, that have failed with this kind of mentality. And I would like to hear what you have to say on it. Of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening.
This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.